The papers arrived on a Thursday morning. Raymond was at his desk when the courier walked in. He signed without looking up. He assumed it was a vendor contract, something routine, something he'd handled 100 times before. It wasn't. He read his mother's name first. Then he read it again. Diane Margaret Holt, deponent, supporting a formal challenge to his father's will. He set the papers down on the desk. He didn't move for a long time. This was the woman who had sat in the passenger seat of his car for 11 months straight. Every chemotherapy appointment, every early morning drive to the hospital on the east side of Columbus. She never once asked to be replaced. She never once suggested someone else could take a turn. She just got in the car. Her signature was at the bottom of the document. Clean, deliberate, unhurried. Raymond had built 15 years of his life around this family. He turned down a career that would have taken him somewhere else entirely. He'd stayed. He'd always stayed. And now a courier had just handed him proof that staying had meant nothing to at least one of the people he stayed for. To understand why that signature destroyed everything, we need to go back. Raymond didn't call Warren. That's the first thing worth noting. His older brother's name was on the filing. His brother's legal team had prepared the documents. His brother had come back to Columbus after 7 years of silence, and, within 6 weeks, had managed to get their mother to sign her name against her own husband's final wishes. And Raymond didn't call him. He called Carla instead, his wife of 19 years. He read the document to her over the phone in a flat, measured voice. The way you read something you haven't fully processed yet. The way your brain protects you from the weight of a thing by making you perform calm until the calm becomes real. Carla asked him where he was. He told her he was fine. She asked again. He told her he was still at the office, that he'd be home by 7, that she didn't need to worry. He stayed at the office until almost 10. That evening, he drove to Cedar Falls, to his mother's house, the one he'd grown up in, the one his father had painted twice and re-roofed once and always said needed a new front path, but never got around to fixing. He parked outside, sat with the engine off, and then he drove home without going in. Raymond was 37 when his father had his first stroke. He'd been living in Columbus at the time, working for a mid-sized contractor, building something of his own. He had a job offer from a firm in Denver sitting on his kitchen table. Good money, real scope. The kind of opportunity you get once, maybe twice in a career. He called his father to talk it through. His father didn't ask him to stay. That was the thing Raymond always came back to. His father never once said the words. He just described how tired he was, how the business felt too big for him right now, how Warren hadn't returned the last 3 calls. Raymond turned down Denver that week. He came back to Cedar Falls. He took over the daily operations of the business, and his father, a quiet man who showed gratitude through action and never through words, started leaving Raymond's coffee on the desk every morning before Raymond even arrived. 11 months of chemotherapy, 15 years of early mornings, the slow and deliberate construction of a trust that Raymond believed was unbreakable. That was what was at stake when the papers landed on his desk. Not money, not property. The meaning of every single thing he had chosen. Warren came back for the funeral. He hadn't been to Columbus in 7 years. Not since their father had amended the will. Not since the board meeting where the financial irregularities were laid out in writing. Not since the conversation no one in the family spoke about openly, but everyone knew had happened. He arrived the morning of the service. No warning. No prior call to Raymond. Raymond saw him standing near the entrance of the chapel. He looked older, quieter than Raymond remembered. He shook Raymond's hand in the way 2 men shake hands when the history between them is too heavy to carry into a room. Raymond let it go. It was a funeral. People come back for funerals. But then he noticed his mother. The moment the service began, Diane reached across and took Warren's hand. Not Raymond's, Warren's. She held it through the entire reading. Raymond told himself it was grief, a mother reaching for her firstborn on the worst day of her life. He told himself it meant nothing beyond that. He didn't pursue it. He should have. Warren stayed. That was the first thing Raymond pushed back on. He went to his mother 2 days after the funeral and asked how long Warren was planning to be in Cedar Falls. Diane told him Warren just needed a few days, that the house was big, that it was good to have company. Raymond said he understood. He asked her to keep it brief. She told him he was being cold, that their father had just been buried, that Warren was still her son regardless of what had happened 7 years ago. Raymond let it sit. Over the following 2 weeks, every time he raised the subject, she found a way to move it. Warren was grieving. Warren had come a long way. Warren deserved a chance to make peace with where things stood. And each time Raymond raised a concern, she turned it back on him. Quietly, not unkindly, but consistently. She suggested that his difficulty with Warren said more about Raymond than it did about his brother. Raymond started to wonder if she was right. He started to wonder if the caution he'd been carrying for 7 years had curdled into something less reasonable. Something that looked, from the outside, like stubbornness dressed up as principle. That doubt was exactly where she needed him. Carla noticed it first. She mentioned it to Raymond on a Sunday evening. Casually, the way you raise something you've been watching for a while, before you're sure it's worth saying. She pointed out that Diane's phone calls had become shorter, that they always ended before anything real was discussed, that Diane had started finishing conversations with a kind of finality that felt deliberate. Raymond said she was reading into it. Then a neighbor mentioned something in passing. He ran into Raymond outside the hardware store in Cedar Falls and said he'd seen Warren's car outside Diane's house 3 times that week. Always on weekdays. Always mid-morning. Raymond checked his call log. On 2 of those mornings, Diane had told him she wasn't up to visitors, that she was resting, that she'd call him later in the week. He stood in the hardware store car park and looked at the dates on his phone. He could see the shape of something. He couldn't name it yet, but the shape was there, and it wasn't the shape of a mother helping her grieving son process the loss of his father. It was the shape of something being arranged. Raymond picked up the phone to call Warren twice that week. Both times he put it down before the call connected. He didn't know what he'd say. He didn't know whether he was reacting to something real or manufacturing a problem out of grief and old resentment. His father was gone. The business was in transition. His brother was back in town after 7 years of silence. It was a lot of moving pieces for any family. Maybe he was just the difficult one. Maybe he always had been. One evening he asked Carla directly. He told her what he'd been turning over. He asked whether she thought his reaction to Warren had ever been proportionate, or whether he'd always used his father's decisions as permission to hold a grudge he would have held anyway. Carla didn't answer straight away. She said she thought Raymond was a fair man. She said she thought he was also a man who found it very hard to be wrong about the people he'd built his life around. He didn't know if that was a comfort or a warning. He didn't sleep well that night. The information didn't come from a lawyer. It came from a woman Carla knew through a community fundraising group, a solicitor by profession. Pleasant enough. No connection to the Hope family whatsoever. They were at an event in Columbus when the woman mentioned, casually, by way of professional small talk, that contested will filings had been up significantly in the past quarter. She said they were time-consuming, that the supporting declarations alone could take weeks to prepare properly. Carla asked a question, just one. The woman's answer confirmed it. A filing of that nature, one backed by a statutory declaration from a family member, typically took 4 to 6 weeks to prepare before it was lodged. Carla drove home without finishing her drink. Raymond was in the kitchen when she walked in. She told him what she'd heard. She told him to check the public court records before he called anyone. He did. The filing had been lodged 11 days ago. The supporting declaration had been prepared before that, which meant the preparation had begun. while Raymond was still returning his mother's phone calls, while he was still driving out to Cedar Falls to check on her, while he was still the dutiful son managing the estate. He sat at the kitchen table and stared at the screen. 11 days. Raymond didn't go to Diane. Not yet. He contacted the probate court directly and requested the available details of the filing. He was careful. He kept the calls short. He didn't involve his own solicitor until he had a clearer picture of what he was dealing with. What came back confirmed the worst of it. Warren was represented by a firm that worked exclusively in contested estate litigation. This wasn't a general solicitor brought in to manage a family disagreement. This was a specialist firm, the kind you hire when you already know the shape of the fight you're walking into. The full supporting declaration wasn't available until formal service was completed. Raymond would have to wait. He'd have to keep taking his mother's calls, keep responding normally, keep acting as though the ground hadn't shifted under everything he thought he knew. He requested formal service be expedited. In the meantime, he pulled the original will documents his father's solicitor had prepared. He went through the amendment from 7 years ago line by line. His father had been clear, unambiguous, of entirely sound mind. Raymond knew that. Everyone who had been present knew that. The question was how far someone was willing to go to say otherwise. He didn't have to wait long to find out. Diane called on a Wednesday. Raymond almost didn't answer, but he picked up on the fourth ring, out of habit more than anything else. Out of 19 years of answering when his mother called, she sounded like herself. That was the thing that wrong-footed him. Warm, unhurried. She asked about Carla. She asked about the business. She mentioned the front path of the house, the one his father had always meant to fix, and said she'd been thinking of getting it done in the spring. Normal. Completely, disarmingly normal. By the end of the call, Raymond had almost convinced himself that the filing was Warren acting alone. That Diane had been pressured, that she hadn't fully understood what she was signing, that the warmth in her voice was the real version of her, and the signature at the bottom of the legal document was something that needed explaining. He wanted that to be true. He wanted it badly. He was still at the kitchen table when Carla walked in and opened her laptop. She'd been checking the public court records daily. She turned the screen toward him without saying anything. Diane was listed as supporting deponent, voluntarily, without coercion. Her legal representation had been arranged separately from Warren's. The warmth of the phone call drained out of the room. She hadn't been pressured. She'd had her own lawyer. The formal service papers arrived on the Thursday, same as the first time. Raymond read the full declaration in one sitting at his office desk. He didn't get up. He didn't make coffee. He just read. The document contained specific, detailed claims about his father's mental and emotional state during the period the will was amended. It described his father as confused, easily influenced, prone to decisions driven by fatigue rather than reason. These weren't general claims. They were specific, dated, sourced from private moments inside the family home, the kind of details only someone present for those years could know. Only Diane could have provided this. She hadn't just signed a document in support of her eldest son. She had built the evidence. She had reconstructed her own husband's final years, the years Raymond had been present for, and reframed them as the actions of a man who didn't know what he was doing. Raymond kept reading. A second attachment. Meeting records from Warren's legal firm. 2 meetings, both dated before the funeral. One dated while their father was still in palliative care. Raymond set the papers down. She hadn't started this after the grief settled. She hadn't been worn down by Warren over weeks of visits. She had walked into that chapel on the day of the funeral, having already decided. The sympathy she'd shown him at the graveside was performed. Raymond drove to Cedar Falls that evening. He didn't call ahead. He knocked once and walked in when she answered. He put the papers on the kitchen table between them and stood across from her. He didn't raise his voice. He asked her to explain it. Diane looked at the documents. She looked at her son, and then she told him, quietly, without apology, without any visible sign that this moment cost her anything, that Warren was her son too. That Raymond had always had everything handed to him, that Warren had nothing left to come back to, that she'd done what any mother would do. Raymond's hands went still. He sat down in the chair at the head of the kitchen table. His father's chair, the one that still had the worn patch on the armrest from years of the same elbow in the same position. He sat in it without thinking, the way you reach for something familiar when the ground gives out. He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally stood up to leave, Diane called after him. She said there was something else he needed to know. Raymond walked out the front door. He didn't turn around. He told Carla everything that night. All of it. Diane's exact words. The flatness of her delivery. The absence of apology. The way she had described Raymond having everything as though it were a character flaw. As though staying, sacrificing, showing up, as though all of that had somehow been a form of greed. Carla held his hand across the kitchen table and didn't try to fix it. For the first time, Raymond didn't defend his mother, didn't look for an explanation that made her actions understandable, didn't reach for the version of events where she'd been manipulated or frightened or confused. He just sat with what was true. And then he went back through 15 years. Denver, the job he didn't take. The holidays cut short. The Sunday mornings at the yard when Carla was home alone. The years he told himself that loyalty was its own reward, that his father's trust was worth more than any salary or opportunity he passed up. He believed he was chosen. He believed his presence meant something specific to the people he'd stayed for. But you don't get chosen by staying. You get used by staying. And the people who use you most effectively are the ones who make you feel like it was your idea. He hadn't been selected. He'd been convenient. The distinction didn't make a sound when it landed. It didn't need to. The will challenge was heard 4 months later. Diane's declaration was admitted into evidence. The judge found insufficient grounds to overturn the will entirely, but ruled that Warren was entitled to a minority stake on the basis of a procedural irregularity in the original amendment. It wasn't the result Warren had wanted. It wasn't the result Raymond had feared. It was worse, because it was enough. Raymond refused to operate the business alongside Warren. He engaged his own solicitor and sold his stake to a third-party development group at below market value. Not out of financial desperation, not out of defeat. He sold it so Warren would inherit nothing Raymond had built. So not a single decision Raymond had made over 15 years would end up benefiting the man who had come back to dismantle everything. The business kept running, just without the Holt name on it. Raymond expected that to feel like something. It didn't. 8 months after the ruling, a neighbor from Cedar Falls called Carla to check in. She mentioned, carefully, the way people mention things they're not sure you know, that Warren hadn't been visiting Diane, that the house had been quiet for months, that Diane seemed to be managing on her own. Raymond found out through a neighbor, not through her. 6 weeks after the ruling, Carla found the letter. It was in a box of documents from the legal discovery process, handwritten on a single sheet of paper, folded once, addressed to Raymond in Diane's handwriting. She hadn't asked Carla to pass it on, hadn't mailed it, hadn't left it somewhere Raymond would find it. She had written it and then put it away somewhere it might never be seen. Carla read it once and handed it to Raymond without telling him what it said. The letter said Diane knew she was wrong, that she'd known it while she was doing it, that she couldn't stop herself, that Warren had been the child she spent 40 years trying to save, and the habit of saving him was stronger than her ability to choose differently, that she was sorry, that she hoped one day Raymond would understand. She never sent it. Raymond held the letter for a long time. Then he folded it along the same crease and put it in a cardboard box in the garage. He hasn't opened it since. There's a version of this story where forgiveness comes eventually, where a mother picks up the phone and a son answers it, where the distance between two people becomes something they can cross. Raymond doesn't live in that version. Some doors don't close because they're locked. They close because no one remembers who was supposed to knock first.